What's up, everyone? Welcome to Hollywood Unveiled, where we pull back the curtain on the Hollywood entertainment industry and get to know the people behind the magic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And Logan, our guest today, is an awesome guest. He's a director and stop-motion animator. He's an illustrator and writer. He's done all these things. He's worked for Stoopid Buddy, Netflix, Adult Swim, Warner Brothers, DC Comics, and Disney, just to name a few.
He's a Care Bear.
He's a Care Bear. He's directed shows like Buddy Thunderstruck and Santa Inc., and his latest project, Freeway Werewolf, is an awesome short out on YouTube now. Logan, our guest today, is Harry Chaskin.
Heck yeah, it is. You were listening on the credits. I was about to be like, but what's his name? So I'm glad we got there. Yeah.
We did. And I'm glad we got there because it was an awesome interview. And I can't wait for people to see this.
He's such a chill dude. Like, and for someone who has such an eclectic kind of like history and like variety of projects, I really liked his insight. Like it was fascinating seeing his insight on a lot of the different aspects of kind of how he got to where he is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And why don't we just get right into it? This is stop motion animator and director Harry Chaskin. Harry, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing all right. It's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here, man. All the things you do are just, the list is way too long. I mean, but I'm going to try anyway. Director, illustrator, animator, actor. You do all the things. You make all the things. Where did it all start for you? What were your influences?
Yeah, I mean, I started making movies and art when I was a kid. You know, I was fortunate that I had really encouraging parents. I got my hands on a Super 8 camera when I was about 10 years old and started messing around with clay animation and stop motion. Got in trouble setting my little Matchbox cars on fire in the driveway and wreaking havoc. And back then you had to send the film away to get it developed. And I remember getting it back as a 10-year-old. And it really is that bit with Adam Scott on Parks and Rec when he's all depressed and he's animating and he's been working on this thing for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And he plays it. And it's like a second and a half of animation. He's like, that's it.
Yeah.
But that was my first wake up call. And also when I realized that I guess I'm a glutton for punishment with this kind of thing. As you said, like I've always been interested in multiple disciplines. And I think that's why so much of my bread and butter has ended up being stop motion. Like what I love about that as an art form is it is this synthesis of so many different things: acting, sculpting, painting, lighting. It's kind of like you get to do a little bit of everything. And so that's what, speaking now, I think that's what's cool about it. I don't know that I was thinking about any of that when I started messing around with all this. Like my dad showed me we had a VHS copy of Ray Harryhausen's Mysterious Island, and that was probably what kicked it all off. Like when all the guys from the Civil War are on the beach and the giant stop motion crab comes out of the sand. I saw that, and I remember as like a 5-year-old turning to my dad and being like, what is going on here? And he kind of explained to me the very rudimentary version. It's like, whoa, you can do that? And from there, I was hooked.
So as someone who kind of was doing this on your own, like what resources were you finding to kind of help you with figuring out this stop motion? Because I think I was saying to Jake earlier, I think the construction of stop motion is really interesting because you have to think about every aspect of the scene, kind of like you were saying, like the lighting, the acting, the environment. So like what training resources do you find to kind of start thinking about that kind of stuff?
I mean, I was really lucky in a way, like for better or worse, both of my parents had jobs in the film industry. My mom, when she was around, was like a story editor. My dad was a screenwriter, but they all came from, the 1970s days of doing it scrappy and making 16mm movies. And they all had friends that were these amazing creative artists and cool people that I was lucky enough to, as a child, be hanging around. First introduction and sort of mentorship, I would say, although he might blush if I put it in that official a capacity. We have a family friend, Rob Niosi, in New York, multi-talented artist, but over the course of his life, he's been a makeup artist, an animator, a director. He worked on the refrigerator characters for Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Okay. Yeah.
In the early or in the 80s, which I thought was cool. And
This explains so much too.
Right. He was the first person I met who it occurred to me like, oh, this could be a job. This is something you could do. And I remember going over and visiting him. And it's not like he ever like sat me down and said, this is how you animate, but we'd play with clay together when I was a young kid. And if anything, like all good artists, he's a depressive personality that I remember telling me around the time Jurassic Park came out, the dream is over, like you're never going to make a living doing this. It was a good run, which is, I guess, a roundabout way of answering your question. But there was Rob. I was fortunate to have an amazing fifth grade teacher who was an amateur filmmaker and helped get my hands on my first Super 8 camera. He taught an after-school elective with me and a bunch of my friends when we were in fifth grade, and he was the first person to really academically break down, like, hey, this is a matte box, this is how you backwind and do a double exposure or a split screen, and kind of got that ruminating in my brain. From there, I got my hands on a mini DV camera as I got older and technology progressed. A lot was self-taught. This was early days of internet, so there wasn't even like, there weren't tutorials to follow or people to follow online. I have stacks of old magazines like Cinefantastique. I used to watch that. I think it was on Discovery Channel, the special effects show, where they'd break down like, this episode's about special makeup effects. This is about matte painting. Kind of anything I could read or watch, and anybody I could talk to and glean some information from, I would do that. And then ultimately, I did end up going to art school. I went to Cal Arts and actually focused on live action filmmaking and screenwriting. But during my time there, Stephen Chiodo of the Chiodo brothers, they did Killer Clowns from Outer Space and countless other amazing things. He actually teaches stop motion there. And I remember seeking him out and saying, hey, can I take your class? And I would bug him like every semester and be like, you're not in the animation department. I don't know. Finally, he let me in and kind of took me under his wing, and I learned a ton from him. And he actually ended up, while I was still in school, giving me my first like paid animator job. They were behind on a project, and he was kind of roping in any student he could find that knew something about how to animate. And that, for me as a 20-year-old was like the coolest thing, to actually go to a professional shop where they're making all this stuff. And to a certain extent, that was trial by fire. It was like, okay, you've taken one class, you barely know how to animate. Here, I'm throwing you on a shot, and try not to screw it up too badly. Yeah, worked with him for a little bit, and then ended up after college doing various odd jobs in animation throughout Los Angeles. And that, I think, was the greatest education, because it really was more of that trial by fire. It's like, oh, okay, we need some props, go build them. We need to light this scene, go help this guy who's been doing it for 40 years, and you'll figure it out. And that it sort of just evolved from there.
So you've really been trying this out since you were little, but what was that first professional setting stop motion job like? How long did it take? What were some preconceived notions you had about it? Were there anything that you thought would be one way turned out to be another way? What were some unexpected challenges?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like that first little stint I did on the job through Stephen Chiodo, in my mind, it's funny, I don't even really consider that my first job, because it was like a couple of days and I knew nothing, and I think he was just being kind in hindsight. I think the most surprising thing, and I came to realize this later, being on sets of all kinds, especially live action sets, coming from being in a place of virtually, any production. I was kind of a one-man band. It's like, okay, I'm writing this, designing it, building it, animating it. So you're always doing something. I think the wake-up call for me there was on any professional set, how much downtime there really is. It was strange for me to be hired as an animator for the day and come in at 9 a.m. ready to like push puppets around and then go, oh, okay, they're still lighting it. It'll be about 3 hours. Okay, now we're going to talk about it. Okay, now go away. They're going to dress the set. So like, I think the first day I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I feel like I'm wasting their money because I sat around for 6 hours and then animated for four. And I think just the cadence of how a real set moves with multiple departments and experts working in every field compared to, doing an independent personal short or something like that. That was the biggest wake up call. That and the fact that despite having taken some animation classes, realizing I had absolutely no idea how to animate when push came to shove was the scarier wake up call. I feel like you can read as much as you can get your hands on, but I would say I didn't really learn how to animate until I was on my first like full season of a TV show and being thrown on shots and going out into the parking lot and having anxiety attacks because I didn't know like how to make something work. It's like really it's that trial by fire, I think, that clicked for me. It was like, okay, I've either got to figure this out or give this up.
Yeah, I think that's a massive one that you're describing. There's a lot of imposter syndrome sometimes. It's like even though you've read all the books, you've learned all the things you're going to learn, no matter how experienced you are, when you get into that first position of in a professional setting, especially, I mean, there's plenty of people out there that'll be like, I belong here. But aside from that, like it's like, okay, they're gonna find out I don't know anything. What am I doing here? I don't know. But how did you find the transition to a studio like Stoopid Buddy? How did that come up? And you became eventually a animation director there.
I did, yeah. Well, I had been an animation director at a studio called Shadow Machine, which is where Robot Chicken started, and they do a lot of 2D and stop motion. Like they were the production company that did Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio film for Netflix, but they also do BoJack Horseman and Tuca and Birdie. So they have their hands in a lot of different types of animation. I had started there as an intern in the art department on the first season of a hardly remembered Adult Swim show called Mary Shelley's Frankenhole that Dino Stamatopoulos created, and it was right up my alley because it was like spooky monsters comedy. Everything was German expressionists and at weird angles. Like it was a very cool first show to work on. And I built some sets and props for that. I ended up then moving to be an assistant animator there, and by the end of that season, I was animating. I think a lot of it was timing. Like if you can get in doing anything on the first season of something, inevitably, I mean, Jake, you talked about imposter syndrome. I'm not saying everybody on the show had imposter syndrome, but every department is figuring out stuff for the first time. So there really is opportunity if you're willing to get your hands dirty and work real hard to kind of jump in and help wherever, without being annoying about it, wherever you see help is needed. And so I was able to kind of rise through that machine, I guess, relatively quickly. And then shortly after that, they had some commercials they were doing and they needed an animation director. And somehow I stumbled into that and have been directing primarily ever since, going back to animate here and there.
You also found yourself within Stoopid Buddy, I believe, directing too,
I
not
did,
just animation director, but
yeah. So the way that happened was Shadow Machine was the original company that was producing Robot Chicken. At a certain point in the series, the creators, Seth Green and Matt Senreich, split off from Shadow and decided for various reasons that they wanted to produce that show in-house under their own banner. they merged with a smaller stop motion house in North Hollywood called Buddy Systems, which was run or created, owned everything by Eric Towner and John Harvatine, who were actually two animators that had started on season 1 of Robot Chicken and had been pretty successful with that and started their own little shop. Literally, I kid you not, running out of like a Winnebago in a parking lot in North Hollywood and a little like almost storage unit. It had 2 loading doors and a couple of stages, but they were producing these amazing commercials, music videos, proof of concepts out of there. And when Seth and Matt were ready to start their own studio, they partnered with Buddy Systems and created Stoopid Buddy. And I, as every freelancer does, prior to this had been bouncing around kind of every stop motion shop in LA that would hire me to do something. I had been at Buddy Systems helping out animating, and I think the distinction here, I have animated in the past, but I've always, like, my passion is storytelling. I've always wanted to write, direct, and produce my own material. And I remember going to Buddy Systems. They had hit me up to animate some project for them back for the Nintendo 3DS. If you remember that, they had a 3D stop motion series called Dinosaur Office, which was very funny. It's like a bunch of dinosaurs meets Office Space, kind of. And I had said to them when they called, like, hey, like, I'm happy to come do this and I'm thankful for the work. Like, really what I want to be doing is writing and directing. And they said, well, hey, like, come animate this for us. And we promise as we grow, like, we'll try to get you in to direct some stuff. And to their credit, they kept true to their word. I ended up directing an episode of Dinosaur Office while I was there, which sounds kind of silly now for a little 3-minute animated short, but they made good on that, and I worked really hard to try to make it as great as I possibly could. And then, yeah, when they merged and started Stoopid Buddy Studios, I was one of the first people in the building, and I came in as a director doing more shorts for them. And at that point, I was bouncing kind of between roles. I did some smaller projects for them as a director. Then I hopped onto another season of Robot Chicken as an animator. Then the next season of Robot Chicken, they had so many projects. They had kind of multiple units going, and I ended up being the animation director on Robot Chicken for a season while that was going on. And yeah, just through that, kind of just kept working on stuff, and as opportunities came along, I was able to jump on board and eventually pretty much be a full-time stop motion director.
That's incredible. I mean, there's 2 kind of big takeaways I gather from that alone. Just one, I mean, give credit where credit is due. That kind of follow through from somebody at a studio that says, stick with us and we'll give you the opportunity.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times that people in the industry that say, oh yeah, stick with us and we'll give you this position, and it just kind of never comes to fruition. And so, I mean, hats off to them recognizing talent that you have, sir. And the second big takeaway I have is, so that's what those Winnebagos are in North Hollywood, because I see a ton of them. Who knew that Robot Chicken was being animated in them?
Yeah, well, I don't know about those Winnebagos now. North
Those
Hollywood,
might
the landscape has changed quite a bit.
those might be different Winnebagos I'm thinking
You
of.
open
now.
a Winnebago door, you got a 50-50 shot. Robot Chicken recording, meth lab. You got a 50-50 shot on each.
Well, chances are, no matter what, somebody is stop motion animating in there. But
there you go.
whether it's a real production or not, I don't know.
Sure,
what else is going on.
And maybe you'll get lucky and find a meth lab.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the Winnebago has become kind of the unofficial, I'm not going to say mascot, but it's become a symbol of that studio. I think they own 4 or 5 beautiful vintage Winnebagos and Airstreams and things. Like a lot of them have moved indoors now and they've become offices, which is kind of cool.
You just get a warehouse unit and it's just lined up Winnebagos as offices now.
Yeah, I mean, as it goes, that's pretty nice. I've been at other studios. I won't share the names, but I once animated on a stage that was literally a bunch of plastic garbage bags held up by precariously stapled 2x4s.
Oh,
Sir,
And
that is not shoddy. That is art direction.
that is art direction.
That
It
is a
was
choice.
motivating for sure. It makes you want to finish the shot so that the whole thing doesn't collapse on.
yeah. So you're working as, an animation director. You're kind of doing that. So walk us through the process from like getting the script to finishing, and what does the role of an animation director actually involve?
It's a great question, and I guess this is that kind of podcast. So I'll go into the annoying semantic distinction
Course.
between animation director and director.
That is exactly what this kind of podcast is.
Yeah,
So.
that's exactly what we want.
Because I have worked both as an animation director, sort of proper noun, as well as a director of a show or series that happens to be animated. So animation directing, which is what my role was for some of Robot Chicken and a bunch of commercials and stuff like that, that's essentially the department head of the animation department. So you can be responsible oftentimes for helping interview and staff the animators, as well as working on the schedule, kind of breaking down the storyboards. But ultimately, the role of the animation director is really to help the director with their technical expertise. So you'll look at a shot, and if there's a character jumping in it, the animation director will flag that and say, okay, obviously with stop motion, you're always fighting gravity. They'll say, okay, we need a rig for this character, whether that's a wire or a piece of ball and socket steel armature. So the animation director will flag that shot, work with the rigging department or the animation assistants, or directly with the animators, depending on the scale of the production, and kind of be the technical expert point person for everything that's being shot, to both flag it ahead of time. It's a lot like an on-set like VFX supervisor, but for animation, like, okay, what is the vision and what do I need to get in place and what do I need to do to help the artists that are actually physically working on it to facilitate it in a timely manner, and also kind of help support the creative. Whereas a director of an animated series or show, which is mostly what I've been doing lately, is much more of directing in the traditional sense. You're involved with design, directing the voice actors, kind of driving the staging and the storyboards. And then usually when it comes time to shoot, the director and the animation director will work with the animators together. The director will approach it much more from a performance standpoint. Like if you think about an animator as an actor, like I as a director might talk to them and say, okay, this is the character in this scene, this is their emotion, this is where they're coming from before this shot, because we shoot out of sequence, this is where they're going, this is why this is important. Or if it's a comedy show, it might often be like, do whatever you want, but this is the joke you have to hit, like make sure this character farts there. It's a rich tapestry. And then the animation director will talk with the animator and say, okay, given all that, do you feel good? What do you need? Do we need to prepare any special rigging? Is there a special effect in this shot where we need to figure out, a little practical muzzle flash for a gun, or some various bodily fluids? This is the kind of thing. It's funny. Like you sit in on a tech meeting for something like any of these Adult Swim shows, and it's funny because you'll have 15 dead serious adults with like backgrounds in art and all sitting around very seriously talking about, well, what do we make the poop out of? How do we get that to look just right? And
you must have missed our episode about John Wick, where we talked about how they spent $5,000 to create CGI dog poop. So I mean,
it seems across the board. I remember.
Sounds about right to me.
This is off topic, but I remember reading a VFX article about the first season of White Lotus and the infamous suitcase scene, and how that was a a combination between the VFX department, the prop master, the makeup department. It's like all hands were on deck for this suitcase poop.
You talk about the differences between animation directing and directing as a series, as a show. When you're directing in the director's position on those show, I bring up Buddy Thunderstruck and Santa Inc. because just under such massive labels, Netflix, HBO. When you're directing for those, are you yourself? Do you find yourself in the trenches, still doing any of the animation yourself too?
On a show that size, very rarely. I think on both Santa and Buddy Thunderstruck, I stepped in to do like a shot or two, but that was really more once production was at a point that I felt like I could step away and do that. A show that size, you have to imagine if the production schedule is a bell curve at peak production, you might have 20, 25 stages or sets going concurrently with 20 animators rotating between them. So my whole day traditionally is walking around this giant warehouse with all these little sets in it, and talking to a team of 100 people. Like it's rare you even get a chance to sit down and have a glass of water. But on those shows, I found that as production was winding down, you ramp up and you ramp down to maximize efficiencies. And when we were on the downswing, I was able, if for no other reason than for fun, to kind of step in and do a shot. But I have worked and I continue to work on all different scales of productions. I've worked on shows like that where you barely have a second to go to the bathroom, let alone animate a shot, versus small projects out of my home studio here. You can probably see the mess of tripods and lights reflected in the mirror there, where I'm doing everything from designing and building it to animating the whole thing to taking it through post and doing the VFX until I have a VFX question, and then I call Jake and say, "What did I do wrong? Can you please help me fix this?" And,
well, that's not a fair thing because you have done that, and I look at it and I say, everything you did here is right. That's exactly what I would have done. So I don't know why you're asking me, just maybe to make me feel good.
Sometimes it's just nice to be corroborated.
Well, let me ask. You just brought something up that made me really made me curious, and I'm going to get into the technical weeds on this because it's like that kind of show.
Sure.
When you've got a show that's got, like you said, 20 stages going at the same time, you just made me suddenly wonder. Everybody spends so much time on every individual shot. Do you have like duplicate sets for things to shoot out shots in the same scene so you can just get more things done? Because I mean, in visual effects,
shot cross coverage kind of thing.
Exactly, like because in visual effects you can work on different things at the same time, but if somebody's occupying, say, the living room set, and you're like, we got 10 other things we need to do in the living room set, do you have multiple living room sets in this case?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. Multiple sets as well as multiple puppets, because you have to think too. A lot of feature film puppets will have machined ball and socket armatures that last forever. In TV, we mostly use wire armatures as the standard because they're faster and cheaper to make. The trade-off is they wear out. So, you might be halfway through a shot and your puppet's arm breaks. So you need to at least have another puppet that's identical standing by. But if it's the main character of the show, you have 25 stages shooting. Like I think when we did Buddy Thunderstruck, I couldn't even tell you how many buddies we had. It had to be in the high 50s, if not more than that. And for sets as well, cross coverage is a great example. We had an episode on that show that was a bottle episode. It all took place in the restaurant that is in the town, and so we had not only 2 exact duplicates of the main restaurant set, but we also had, I think, 4 or 5 little split offs of different corners of the restaurant. Like when it came time to board and shot list that, we had an overhead of the restaurant and we'd go in and say, okay, we're here. This will all go to this stage. This will go to this stage. So there's a lot of logistical puzzle pieces to move around. And you're also shooting like with live action out of sequence. So I might be shooting like a single on one character sitting at a table in May. And then because animation takes so long, I'm picking up the reverse shot of the reaction to the line in September on a completely different set. So it's a lot to keep track of. And that's where good storyboarding and production coordinating comes in. And honestly, that's a part of my brain that does not work so well. I've been lucky to work with some amazing production coordinators that really track all the puppets and sets across weeks and months and figure all that out. We don't tend, I know you said cross coverage, we don't tend to shoot multi-camera a lot with stop motion, which I'm sure you run into this with both visual effects. And if you're doing like a makeup gag, stuff is designed to work from one angle, Oftentimes with stop motion, if you're animating a character like holding up a drink to say cheers, you're lining it up to look good from that camera angle. And if you're suddenly trying to make that look good from this angle and from the reverse over the shoulder, it doesn't work. So very rarely have we shot like two cameras on a single set to maximize that.
So in working through these, because you have directed both live action and stop motion, like projects, how does like your personal process differ? Like when you're tackling each one?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, like my sweet spot, like what I love to work in and what I want to do more of and what I'm slowly doing more of is hybrid work. I love, I said I was inspired by Ray Harryhausen. I love combining stop motion with live action and, finding narrative reasons and world building reasons to do that in a way that it makes sense. And at the end of the day, the processes are not too dissimilar. You're still dealing with a fixed amount of physical assets, physical sets, physical lights. Stop motion is just live action really, really slowly. I think the biggest difference comes into play with pre-production, especially it's a little looser if it's a short film or a personal project and you have the luxury of kind of finding stuff as you go and pivoting and discovering new things because it's all you and you're not hemorrhaging money every minute. But you're editing in the animatic phase. And I know this comes into VFX too with previs and kind of figuring that out. But because stop motion is straight ahead, you can't iterate and do multiple drafts of a shot. So you're really in pre-production, recording the voices, cutting the animatic, and committing to that timing and those angles, more or less before you've shot anything. And if you want to change gears after the fact, it starts to become very expensive. They will on a big theatrical production like a Leica production or Pinocchio for Netflix, they will do retakes and they will kind of revise stuff as you go. But generally, stop motion for TV is so lean and moves so fast. You have to get used to committing to those choices and then following through, even if, hey, this thing that I thought was a good idea in storyboard 6 months ago, now that I'm getting to set, doesn't feel so great. I mean, I have had cases where it became clear we needed to make a change, but for the most part, you try to get it right out of the gate. And I think, if anything, like to answer your question about the difference, that has affected my live action directing more than my live action directing has affected my animation. Like working in animation for so long has kind of forced me into that mindset of prevising and committing. And, I love it when happy accidents happen on a live action set or we discover a new angle or something. And I'm not gonna, if time permits, say no, but there are some live action directors that come onto set with nothing and block it there with the actors. And I feel like I very much work the other way around of like, let's just shoot what we need and not do a ton of coverage. And which, I think there are pros and cons to each, but for better or worse, that's kind of how it's informed my directing.
I'm curious with that because you said something there that I think is fascinating. So like when you're filming in live action, finding those those happy accidents in a performance where it's like your actor does something unexpected, or it's like, oh, that's a little character twitch or a detail that like they decide in the moment. How are you thinking to factor that in your pre-production when you're doing a stop motion project? Because it's like you have to almost fake the improvisation at an earlier stage. So it's like, yeah.
For sure. And I mean, it's funny you say that because I do love improvisation, and some of the smaller shows that I've done, like I'm really good friends with a lot of UCB improvisers and comedians, and something that was initially really exciting to me was how do we take that energy of improvisation or a live performance and channel that into animation. And I think there's sort of two facets. One is when I'm working with voice actors in the booth, I really do try to encourage improv.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, that sort of gives you the best of both worlds, because, you're not spending money yet, really. You can go completely off the rails in the recording booth and have a great time and go chase a tangent. And then you might end up in the edit using 5 seconds of it, but it's a really funny 5 seconds that you wouldn't have gotten if you just stuck to the script. So, whenever possible, I love to ensemble record and let the actors play off of each other. Like, we've gotten some of our funniest stuff that way. But like on Santa, even with a lot of the actors involved, there were some big names on that show, and scheduling them was hard. But I almost found myself doing this thing where if we were recording with Seth Rogen, he would riff off himself and come up with really funny stuff. And I make a mental note of that. And then if we're recording the other side of the conversation with Sarah Silver, I'd say, hey, Sarah, like Seth actually in the record did something really funny here. And I'd feed that line and let her do her thing. So you're almost crafting like a dual improv performance without the actors being in the room together. I think the other piece of it actually comes in the animators being open and receptive to the ideas that they bring to it. Like every once in a while, an animator will say, hey, what if this character had this prop and did something funny with it during this line? And I'll be like, oh, that's great. Let's call the art department, see if we have one of those, and we'll do it. But, at that point, you're on set. So you're trying to run with that while also weighing, well, did we shoot the rest of this scene already? If that prop shows up and then disappears, is it a problem? So, I think there's room for improvisation and kind of finding moments of performance with the animator, but it's a little bit more restrictive once you get to shooting on the stages.
I had a random question for you, kind of circling way back to something you mentioned back when with working with Super 8, because I filmed with Super 8 in college.
Nice.
And it's temperamental, to say the least. So I'm curious, because when you were working with Super 8, you were, as you kind of said, you were a kid, you're doing it on your own. How many times did you shoot footage and send it off and get it back, only to find out it was too dark?
It's almost every time, except the other way around. I actually found out I was overexposing. I remember staying up all night one night with my friend Justin, doing like a action figure animation and sending it off, and we got it back, and the whole thing was just clear white film.
Oh no!
So
oh no!
That's the pitfall of film. I'm glad. I don't know how did you feel about that? Like for me, I'm glad I had the experience of that frustration.
Yeah, I'm glad I had the experience with it. But I kind of had the same thing. Like I shot like an entire film with the Super 8, and only one little bit turned out. So good thing I already graduated because I'm about to. So I borrowed my buddy's like higher def camera and shot, because I had to submit test footage the next day. So I reshot the entire movie in a night, and then just put a ton of video filters on it so it looked like Super 8, just so I could pass that class. And the teacher was like, "Man, you had great resolution and lighting on these." I'm like, "Yeah. I did."
That's like the cinematic equivalent of buying a store-bought dessert and bringing it to a potluck after dressing it up with a little bit of frosting.
I was like, I don't want to fail the class, and I did shoot it.
I love that you both just told on yourselves with that.
Yeah, right.
So the next potluck I have you over for, Harry, that I'll know.
He's going to be really scrupulous of that dessert you bring. That's all he said. That's all we're saying.
And I'll be there going, and I don't care.
This looks and tastes an awful lot like a McDonald's apple pie. You got the paper and everything.
Nice of you to individually wrap this homemade pie for me. Thank you so much.
But Jake, that's not fair because you're the guy that figured out how to perfect like the Zanku garlic sauce from scratch in the kitchen. So
I wouldn't say perfect, but it's a decent substitution.
Close enough for government work, right?
What is something that is misunderstood by people outside of stop motion? I think we get a lot of that here, where in all our departments, we know that there's something that other departments, other people maybe take for granted, don't understand how it works. So it could diminish their storytelling capabilities if they don't know that these things are a certain way. What's something out there that you find that is misunderstood?
I'll give you a joke answer and a real answer.
I'll take them both.
The joke answer, and this is, any animator listening to this will probably agree with me, is sort of claymation becoming a blanket term for all of stop motion. Claymation was Will Vinton's trademarked technique. Will Vinton, who did the California Raisins and the Noid and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So claymation refers specifically to that. You could make an argument that you could apply it to any stop motion that's done with clay or clay figures. But I think for me and every other stop motion animator, when they hear claymation as a term being kind of thrown around to describe stuff with silicone puppets or 3D printed faces or anything like that, it's like, oh, that's not the same thing. It's like one is a subset of the other.
Well, before you get to the other answer, aside from the technical, like you're not working with clay situation, is it also like sort of a Kleenex and tissue kind of situation? Like claymation was his thing?
Yeah, exactly. Because claymation is trademarked.
Mhm.
It's or copy
Very much the artistic style that he was kind of bringing to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
It's like Harryhausen had Dynamation, which was the name for his technique of using rear projected live action footage and stop motion puppets. Like Dynamation and claymation, those are all sort of trademark techniques. If I was a little goofier, like one of these days, I'd try to come up with a term like that for whatever the hell it is that I'm trying to do. But I don't have the guts.
Well, me and James already we use the term the Chaskin method with Hullabaloo with with our filling in the ones and twos, like that technique you taught me that adds in the motion blur and everything. We just call that the Chaskin method. So
I mean, that makes me happy, but I feel like I can't fully take credit for that. That's a weird, almost a glitch in After Effects that I discovered accidentally to essentially tween animation that's been shot on twos, and Jake used it to great effect when doing the compositing for one of my short films, and then you also used it with James Lopez's amazing series. But yeah, so claymation, Chaskin method, Dynamation, they're all equally impressive things, he said with sarcasm. I think the biggest misconception, or not even a misconception, just kind of a knowledge gap, and I run into this with clients as well as people budgeting, is the fact, and I think I touched upon this a little bit earlier, unlike any other type of animation or visual effect, stop motion is straight ahead, meaning, with a CG animated sequence, you can block it, render it out, decide you don't like something, tweak a bit of performance, render it out again. Same with 2D. You might animate by starting with the core of the body, get that looking good, then go in and do one of the arms. Stop motion, it's all physical objects in camera under physical lights. If you have a crowd scene with 30 puppets in it, you're animating all 30 of those at once and keeping track in your head of what they're all doing, which is challenging, but that's masochistically, I think, why so many of us love it so much. The misconception, I think, is the idea that things can easily change. I'll be working with a commercial client or a producer, and This extends to fabrication as well. It'll be an 8-week puppet build, and we've had a 2D design approved, and we've been showing them progress every step of the way. And then a week before the puppet's supposed to hit the stage to shoot, someone will say, "What if the nose was a different shape, or what if the puppet was green instead of blue?" And be like, well, there are multiples of these. We've got 80 of this puppet, and they've all been painted green last week, so. I think that's kind of what's wonderful about the art form is that spontaneity and those happy accidents do get baked in, but when working in a commercial capacity, dealing with people at various tiers and trying to explain a vision and getting sign off on it, I think more than any other art form, it's imperative to really drill in like, hey, what you're seeing now is what it is, and if we want to change it, this is the time. And I know that's true with so many overworked VFX artists, and the money adds up no matter what. I think the difference with stop motion is it really does hit a point of no return where you're like, okay, that's what it is, unless you want to reshoot the whole movie.
Well, Harry, you're just not working with the right tools. Do you understand? To fix those things, you just need to get a time machine. That's
Yeah,
all
exactly.
you need. You're not thinking fourth dimensionally.
Yeah, time machine. That's what we all need. It is an old art form. I'll get my time machine and travel back to Russia in the 1910s and hang out with Starovich while he's animating bugs. And I'll say, stop. You're going to make everybody miserable.
There you go. That's another way to fix it, I guess.
Yeah.
Speaking of misery, actually, this works really well. So you're working on all these different projects. So how does the Happiest Place come about?
Happiest Place was an original graphic novel that I released back a few years ago about the seedy underbelly of theme parks. Like, I'm a diehard Disney fan, both in terms of the animation history and the theme park history. And years ago, I started writing a comic book. I was like, hey, it'd be kind of funny if there was almost like a film noir-esque glorified security guard at a theme park who's a hard ass that takes his job way too seriously, but then as with every good mystery, sort of gets sucked into something much more serious set against the cheerful backdrop of this Disney-esque amusement park. I wrote it. It was actually, the drawings were done anthology style, which was a fun excuse to hit up a bunch of my amazingly talented visual artist friends, and each of us took a chapter. I kind of cast the chapters with friends based on what I think they'd have fun drawing and what their art style would be a good fit for narratively. Self-published it through Amazon, and it's out in the world. I'm actually developing a TV pitch based on it. I have a pilot written and a deck for that, and one of these days I'd love to pitch it out and get it made. It's just a little bit challenging when Disney owns 70% of the media landscape. I got to find a not Disney affiliated studio or network that would take a chance on it.
They might think you're talking about them in your story. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean,
who also has that amusement park? Universal.
Yeah, but Universal doesn't have a Mickey Mouse-esque mascot called Waldo Rabbit that has white gloves and overalls, and
they do have minions.
They do have minions. I love me a good minion, but I don't know what I'm saying.
Neither do we, and we have this show, so I mean that's why. But
I'm shocked they let us record.
Well, you know what's shocking? With all the stories that you've been telling, I love. There's usually a dark undertone, if not overtone, in some respects of between Steel Cut Oats, Freeway Vampire, or Freeway Werewolf.
Sequel, Freeway Vampire.
Freeway Vampire is the next one. Freeway Werewolf, Happiest Place, worked in all kinds of these dark stories. Look behind you, your radio is gonna eat you in about a minute.
Even the design of that Garfield and Pillsbury Doughboy, all those different things that you designed. Yeah, there's definitely
all of those. I have to know, how did Bedtime Bear come around?
I do the voice of Bedtime Bear in the Care Bears reboot. You know, we haven't talked a lot about this. I am a voice actor as well. I'd say very much on the side. That's such a competitive industry. It's the kind of thing that, you know, I love doing, but truthfully, I haven't had the bandwidth or the wherewithal to put into it what I would need to try to be one of the 0.5% that have the luxury of making that a full-time career. I won't get on my soapbox, but that's gotten even harder with stunt celebrity casting and AI voices coming onto the scene, which is very disturbing. But Bedtime Bear, I stumbled into that actually through Buddy Thunderstruck. Buddy Thunderstruck was created by Ryan Wiesbrock, who is one of the higher ups at American Greetings, who, of course, own Care Bears. And so, in addition to creating his own show for Netflix, he oversees a lot of the, if not all, of the American Greetings animated properties. And so, I had done some voices on Buddy Thunderstruck. He and I became friends when they were getting ready to reboot the Care Bears property. He called me and said, "Hey, you know, we're auditioning for this. Do you have any interest in being a Care Bear?" And yeah, I ended up. I read for a few different ones. I had my eye on Grumpy, actually, just something about
Of course
identifying
you would.
with him. But as it turned out, they liked my take on Bedtime, and so I ended up doing that. It was funny because when they gave the brief for that, they changed a lot of, I guess, what you would consider the classic Care Bears aesthetic and lore. Like the first thing he told me was Bedtime Bear is not really that sleepy. So wait, he's Bedtime Bear. I thought that's like that's his thing that he does. He's like, no, he's more like he's a night owl. He sleeps during the day, and then at night he's almost like a Christopher Lloyd-esque Doc Brown kind of manic scholar. And I said, okay, that's kind of fun. I can get into that. So yeah, it's not that exciting a story, really. I guess I just I knew the guy that was in charge of Care Bears, and he said, "Do you want to try out for this?" And I said,
there you go.
Now, with directing projects, talk to us about some of your more current ones, like Steel Cutouts and Freeway Werewolf, which hysterical. Like watched it the other day, very very funny. I like that even in live action, you still find the ways to use the stop motion and kind of bring that element into it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, which is funny. I feel like if I look at the YouTube comments on Freeway Werewolf, it's definitely divisive. Like I was really excited about the stop motion werewolf, and there's a lot of people that did not respond to that. And for me, honestly, that was a bit of a wake-up call in a good way. I think. I don't know. I always think back. This applies to both Steel Cutouts and Freeway Werewolf and a lot of other projects I have in the pipeline that combine stop motion in one way or another. Like even back in the day when Harryhausen was doing his Dynamation, he always said that he wasn't striving for realism. He was striving for something a little bit dreamlike, a little bit heightened, kind of something that's better than real. And I think regardless of like the tone or the subject matter, if I'm adding stop motion into something, whether it's successful or not, that's kind of the approach I take. I think we're at a time now if you want something photoreal that's perfectly integrated and tracks with a camera move, like CG has been there now for quite some time. I think I look at stop motion less as a necessity and more of an aesthetic choice. Steel Cutouts is a story that takes place in sort of this pulpy 1940s-esque fairy tale. It's a fantasy. The creatures are all sympathetic monsters. Stop motion felt like the way to bring that to life in a way that was a little more kind of visually eye-catching and unusual. Same thing with Freeway Werewolf. I made that actually as a proof of concept for a feature treatment I have that's very much kind of a Jaws on the freeway where you're following different people in different cars stuck in traffic, dealing with this freeway werewolf kind of moving through and picking off people one by one. But, you know, at its heart, it's a goofy B movie idea. I think what excites me more about realizing that is leaning into the camp of it. Like when we made the short, we didn't green screen the car stuff. We did it with rear projection. We did the werewolf with puppets and prosthetics and stop motion. I think if I meant people to take that movie seriously, I probably would take a different approach.
You also probably wouldn't be calling it Freeway Werewolf. But
Yeah, that too. But again, I think stop motion can be incredibly versatile. I have a couple feature dramas that I'm taking out right now that have some stop motion elements, and they're still played in sort of like the dreamlike fantastical realm, but I do think that aesthetic does kind of set it apart and create something that's a little bit different. It's a choice or a tool in the toolkit more than anything. And I think with anything like that, it's like, okay, what's the right approach for this?
I don't really have anything to go out on, but aside from just, dude, this has been a blast having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for doing this with us. Where can people find you on all the socials online? Where can they see your stuff?
You can find me on Instagram at hchaskin and at my website, harrychaskin.com. I have a YouTube channel as well that I don't remember the name of, but I got stuff on there. And that's about it. Right now we're doing some festivals with Freeway Werewolf. If you're in the Los Angeles area, I'll be bouncing around over the next few months with that. And otherwise, yeah, I mean, Instagram is kind of the best place to find me. I'm usually posting weird sculptures and snippets of movies and stuff like that. But this has been great. Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun chatting.
Oh, dude, and you mentioned your YouTube. I can't wait to see more like your Mr. Peanut and all that. That's beautiful videos you've been putting up there.
I'm working on one now, which will date the episode, but I'm customizing an old Mighty Max into a Freddy Krueger head. It's like a little scene inside. So.
All right. That's exciting.
Look out for that a month ago when this probably airs.
Well, dude, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Logan, that was awesome.
Yeah. No, he was a super fun dude to talk to. Like it's interesting hearing the different perspective. Because he has directed like he kind of mentions directing stop motion, directing animation, and directing live action, and hearing how that kind of changes across the board. Yeah, fascinating interview.
Oh yeah, and when we talked about the things that people don't really understand, he said it as a joke, but that actually makes sense to me. I mean, I don't think that's a joke at all. Like the term claymation instead of stop motion, it refers to a very specific thing. So things like that to me, I'm like, oh, that is misunderstood.
I've been guilty of it myself. I've referred to things as like Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run as claymation, when it's like it's not. So it's like it is a misconception that I think a lot of people would have. Yeah.
I mean, it might appear to look like it's made out of clay, but not actually clay. So, I mean, I understand the misconception there, but yeah.
I know that Wallace and Gromit folks, they had the clay shortage a couple months ago. Where they were like, hey, there was a whole thing on social media. They were like, we are in pre-production on a project, but we use a very specific type of clay, and there is currently a shortage. So we are out. So unfortunately, the studio is shutting down because we don't have any more clay.
Oh my God.
And then less than a week went by, and they were like, so there's been such an outpouring from people like not wanting our studio to shut down. We found a reserve. We're back to work.
There you go. Or did everybody just start sending them clay?
Well, that's the thing. I think if I remember correctly, the way it was solved was that one of the people who saw that, who was just a fan, was like, oh, I have like a storage unit full of it. Like I will be more than happy to donate to the cause. Like
if it keeps the studio intact.
Yeah, it was just something like that where he's like, yeah, like I'd happily do this thing.
That's wild. And we should have brought that up at some point there.
Well, yeah.
Logan, that was a great interview with him. I think I had a great time catching up with Harry. Known him for a long time, and it's always awesome hearing stories from him. And he's one of those storytellers too that and I've told this to his face, he is annoyingly good. It annoys me how good he is at the things he does, because I wish I was half as good as him when it comes to like his illustrations, his writing, his storytelling in general. He's and by the way, stop motion. If you didn't
Yeah.
catch from the episode, but it was an absolute pleasure catching up with him.
Yeah.
But Logan, where can the people find you?
I'm findable. You can find me on Twitter at FilmGuy89, on Instagram at FilmGuy1989. I'm on YouTube. I got a bunch of those readings. I'm rocking the merch. If you see anything for Bunny Man and Company, that's an animated series that I am lucky enough to be a voice on. I know they're hard at work on a couple of the further episodes. I don't know where the pilot is now, but it's out there somewhere. But yeah, I'm findable. How about you, Jake? Where can they find you?
You can find me and my company at VFX2Go on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. One of these days I'll post a thread, so I'll get to it. And you can find us on our website, vfx2go.com. Hey, Logan, did you know we have a .com?
Well, I've heard you mention it before.
It's not like I say this every episode.
No, but I do have that memento disease, so I forget it every single time.
Our website is hollywoodunveiled.com. You can also find us on the socials at Hollywood Unveiled Podcast. And we're around.
Yeah.
There. Until next time, I've been Jake.
I've been Logan.
This is Hollywood Unveiled. Is that what we're doing now?
That is the most concise way I think you have attempted to end this podcast.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Not now, though. That's, now this is the ending. So you had it, and then we stepped on it. That's how it works.
Yeah.